The numbers don't lie. That's something my manager at the firm drilled into me during my first week. As a forensic accountant, people lie. Documents get altered. Stories change depending on who's telling them. But numbers always leave a trail. I was staring at a trail right now, and it led straight back to my own family. The spreadsheet on my laptop showed 3 years of transactions. My contributions to the household. My brother's gambling losses that somehow became family expenses. My mother's spa appointments coded as home maintenance. My father's fishing trips listed as vehicle costs. I'd built this document quietly, over 8 months, pulling receipts and bank statements the way I'd been trained to methodically, without emotion, without confrontation. I hadn't said a word to either of them. Not yet. My name is Sophie, and I am 31 years old. I hold a CPA designation, and I work for a mid-sized accounting firm in Calgary. I have spent the last 6 years reconstructing fraudulent financial records for clients who were cheated by people they trusted. The irony was not lost on me. I'd moved back into my parents' house in Airdrie 3 years ago. After my grandmother, my mother's mother, had her second stroke and needed someone to help coordinate her care. It was supposed to be temporary, 6 months maybe. I'd sublet my apartment in the city, packed 2 suitcases, and told myself it was the right thing to do. What I didn't understand then was that moving home wasn't a favor I was doing for my family. It was a resource they had been waiting to access. Within 2 months of my return, my father had stopped contributing to the household bills entirely. He told me it was because he was between contracts. He works in oil and gas, or he used to, before the industry started cycling through boom and bust faster than he could keep up. My mother had always worked part-time at a garden center, and she kept doing that, but her paycheck seemed to evaporate before it ever touched anything practical. My brother, Darren, was 34 and lived in the basement suite. He had been there since he was 26, following a failed attempt at a restaurant venture that left him with what my mother called some debts, and what his credit history called a disaster. Darren didn't work regularly. He picked up shifts at a buddy's auto shop when he felt like it, but mostly he spent his time at the casino on the edge of the city, or watching sports with his friends in the basement, while I paid the internet bill upstairs. I covered the mortgage top-up when my parents fell short. I covered the gas and electricity. I bought groceries. I told myself I was helping. I told myself it was family. My grandmother passed away 14 months ago. She left her estate to be divided among her 3 children and her grandchildren. My mother received her share directly. Darren and I were each left a portion through a separate arrangement. Grandma had been particular about that, precise in the way some older women are, when they've watched money disappear inside families before. My share of the estate came to $240,000, held in a registered account that would transfer to me upon the completion of probate. I made the mistake of mentioning it at dinner. I don't know why I said it out loud. I think I was tired. I think I'd had a long week and I came home to find the dishwasher still broken, the recycling still sitting by the back door, and a note from Darren asking me if I could spot him $300 until his next shift. I sat down at the table, and my mother asked how things were going with Grandma's estate, and I said, without thinking, that my portion had been confirmed, and it was more than I expected. My father put down his fork. My mother looked at Darren. Darren smiled at his phone. I knew immediately that I had made an error. Not a catastrophic one. The money wasn't accessible yet. Probate was still in process, but I had given them information, and information inside this family had a way of becoming leverage. I was right. The ask came 3 weeks later. My father sat me down in the living room formally, which was unusual. He was not a formal man, and explained that Darren was in a difficult position. The debts from the restaurant had not gone away. There were people, he said carefully, who were expecting repayment, and the situation had become uncomfortable. He didn't use the word dangerous. He didn't have to. I had grown up watching my parents use softened language to describe Darren's problems, as though naming them accurately would make them worse. He said they needed me to contribute a significant portion of my inheritance to help settle the debt and stabilize the family finances. The number he suggested was $180,000. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I listened to him explain why this was reasonable, why family looked after family, why Darren had potential if he just had a fresh start, why my grandmother would have wanted the money to keep the family together. I said I would think about it. What I actually did was go upstairs, open my laptop, and begin building the most detailed financial reconstruction I had ever done for someone I loved. 8 months. That's how long it took me to understand the full scope of what had been happening. The household contributions I'd made that had been used for other things. The way my name had been added to a secondary credit card on my parents' account I hadn't noticed because I never used it. But someone had, repeatedly, at the casino. The phone plan I paid for that had 4 lines on it, not 3. The car insurance that covered a vehicle I'd never driven. I also found something I hadn't been looking for. 3 years before my return, My grandmother had given my mother a gift of $40,000, with a written note that the money was for my education fund. She'd wanted to help me pay down my student loans. That money had never reached me. It had been deposited into my parents' joint account and dispersed over 18 months on things I could trace. But that had nothing to do with me. I printed nothing. I saved everything to an encrypted cloud folder with a name that looked like a file reference number. I told no one. I also made 2 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer, a family law and estate specialist in Calgary. A woman I'd been referred to through a colleague. I explained my situation in broad strokes. She explained my options. I booked an appointment and brought my documentation. The second call was to the probate office, to ask a procedural question about the timing of the transfer. In doing so, I learned something useful. I could request that the funds be transferred to a new account, one that didn't exist yet, without notifying any third parties. There was no legal obligation to inform my family of the account details. I opened a new account at a credit union I had never used before, in a branch across the city. I updated the transfer information with the estate administrator. I said nothing at home. The money arrived on a Thursday, in late October. I know the exact moment it cleared because I was at my desk at work and my phone buzzed with the notification. I set the phone face down and finished the report I was writing. Then I went to the bathroom, stood at the sink, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. I thought about my grandmother, about the way she used to press money into my hand when I was a teenager, and whisper that it was for me, just for me. No one else needed to know. She had understood something about this family that I had spent years trying to unsee. Okay, Grandma, I said quietly to my reflection. Let's finish this. I had already consulted with my lawyer about the $40,000 that had been redirected years ago. She confirmed that the paper trail I'd assembled, my grandmother's written note, the deposit records, the subsequent spending was sufficient to support a civil claim. She also pointed out that my name on that secondary credit card, with charges I had not authorized, was a separate matter with its own implications. She used the word misappropriation. She used the phrase potential fraud. She advised me to be careful, to document everything, and not to move until I was ready. I was ready on a Saturday morning in November, when my father came into the kitchen while I was making coffee, and told me that the people Darren owed money to were getting impatient, and they needed an answer from me by the end of the weekend. I asked him to sit down. I asked my mother to come in from the living room. I texted Darren, "Come upstairs, please." When all 3 of them were at the kitchen table, I opened my laptop and turned it to face them. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I explained what I had found, the way I would explain findings to a client, calmly, in sequence, with the supporting documentation visible on screen. The credit card charges, the phone plan, the $40,000 from Grandma, the 3 years of household financials I had reconstructed. My mother said I was being dramatic. My father said those credit card charges must have been a misunderstanding. Darren said nothing. He was looking at the screen with an expression I recognized, the look of someone calculating how bad it actually was. I told them I wasn't there to argue about interpretation. I told them the inheritance had already transferred and was in an account they didn't have access to. I told them I had spoken to a lawyer. My mother's voice changed. She told me I was ungrateful. She told me Darren needed this. She told me I didn't understand what it was like to have a son in real trouble. She said if I didn't help the family, she wasn't sure she could keep a relationship with me. My father said that if I was going to be difficult, maybe it was time to discuss whether I was still welcome in the house. I had expected this. I had rehearsed for this. I kept my voice level. I told them that I had 3 things to say, and I asked them to listen before responding. First, I was moving out. I had already signed a lease on an apartment in Calgary, effective December 1st. I had arranged for movers. I would be out of the house in 3 weeks. Second, I was not giving Darren the money. I was not co-signing anything. I was not assuming any debt that was not mine. Darren's financial situation was Darren's to resolve. Third, regarding the $40,000 from Grandma and the unauthorized credit card charges, I had documentation and legal counsel. I was not filing anything at this moment, but I wanted them to understand that the option existed and that it would remain documented. My mother started to cry. Real tears, or something close enough that it didn't matter. My father said I was making a mistake. He said family was the only thing that mattered when everything else went wrong. I looked at him and I thought about every time I'd heard that sentence, or a version of it, used to explain why I should give more, ask for less, and be grateful for the privilege of being allowed to do both. I know you believe that, I said. I used to believe it too. I carried the first box to my car that afternoon. Over the following 2 weeks, I moved methodically. I had already separated my finances from the household accounts months earlier. Quietly, 1 subscription and automatic payment at a time. I'd had my mail redirected to a P.O. box in November. I transferred my personal files from the home office to my firm's secure server. On my last night in Airdrie, I sat in my empty room and wrote a letter to my brother. Not to my parents, I wasn't ready for that, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But Darren was different in a way I'd spent years pretending didn't matter. He was not a malicious person. He was a person who had never once been required to face a consequence, and who had therefore grown into someone incapable of anticipating them. I told him I loved him. I told him I couldn't rescue him. I told him I hoped he would find a way through his situation that didn't depend on someone else bleeding for it. I left the letter on the kitchen counter and drove back to Calgary in the dark. The apartment was quiet and mine. I'd bought a second-hand dining table and 2 chairs. I made tea and sat at the window and watched the city lights. My phone had 17 messages from my mother. I read them all and replied to none. My lawyer sent a follow-up email about the civil matter. I had decided, after a lot of thought, not to pursue it immediately. I had the documentation. The option wasn't going anywhere. What I needed first, more than restitution, was distance. Room to breathe. A year of quiet in which I could remember who I was before I came home and let the household absorb me. A colleague asked me a few weeks later how I was doing. She knew I'd moved. Knew something had shifted. I told her I was good. She looked at me carefully and said I seemed lighter. I thought about that word. Lighter. I thought about the spreadsheet I'd built over 8 months. I thought about my grandmother pressing money into my palm with instructions that it was mine. I thought about the moment the transfer notification came through on my phone, and I put it face down and finished my report. Because I had learned somewhere in those 6 years of forensic work, or maybe somewhere much earlier, that the most powerful thing a person can do in the middle of chaos is simply keep working. The numbers don't lie, and neither does this. I am 31 years old. I have a 2-bedroom apartment. I chose myself. I have a career I built without anyone's help, and I have $240,000 sitting in an account with my name on it. My brother texted me in January. He said he'd found a debt counselor. He said it was hard. He said he was sorry, not with a lot of words, but with enough. I wrote back. Not a lot, but enough. My parents haven't called since December. I don't know if that will change. Some days I think about reaching out, and then I think about my father's face when he told me maybe I wasn't welcome in the house, and I close my phone and make dinner instead. There is a quote I wrote on a sticky note and put on my refrigerator the first week in my new apartment. I don't remember where I heard it. It says, "You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm." My grandmother would have liked that, I think. She was precise in the way she loved people, careful about where she put it, careful about what it cost her. I'm learning to be like her. I turned off the spreadsheet for good in February. Not deleted, I'm an accountant. I don't delete documentation. But closed, filed, moved to a folder I don't need to open anymore. There's a window in my apartment that faces east, and in the morning the light comes in at an angle that makes the whole room look gold. I have a plant on the sill that is, improbably, thriving. I have a French press and a good coffee grinder and no one knocking on my door asking for anything. It is a small life, maybe, but it is mine, completely, for the first time. And that is worth more than any number I have ever put in a spreadsheet.